All right. So again, thank you so much for being here. And huge thanks again to the Vestigo team. And sorry to embarrass you maybe, but huge thanks especially to Lily for all of the hard work that she put in making this happen. So thank you. So a little bit of the sort of why behind this gathering. Many moons ago on a snowy day, Kelly and I were just talking about the fact that, this is a moment in time when people more than ever connection, need insights, need best practices, especially when it comes to fundraising, especially when it comes to deploying capital for growth, especially when it comes to balancing out your cash runway and your growth objectives. And in talking about this further, Kelly was like, I know a few people who have great perspective on this. So we figured we would get this group together to share some of their lessons learned in support of this amazing startup ecosystem that we have, especially in the fintech space. Boston is so strong in fintech, and I think one of our superhero strengths is the way in which we share information, share best practices with one another. So that's a big part of this event and the goal for this event. So again, my name is Kristen Kraft. I'm part of the team at Fidelity for Startups. We have a great product, Fidelity Private Shares, which does equity management. The goal being to help you raise money and help you not get tangled up in due diligence. So we'd love to talk with you about that. But most importantly, I want to let our amazing panelists share a little bit about themselves, their trajectory, and their group that they work with. So, Yi, let's start with you.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for organizing this. Thank Kristen for the intro. So my name is Yi, just like better. I'm currently CEO of OpenCity, a voice AI platform for drive-through restaurants. And before that, I was at Toast for almost over a decade. Was early employee there, saw the growth phase and all the crazy roller coaster rides of tech startups. And before that, I came to Boston. Came to Boston for business school, and that's how I ended up here. I grew up in the restaurant industry, so growing up, my parents said never ever do anything with restaurants. Whatever you do. So funny enough, after 4 years of General Electric business school, found my way back to restaurants, building point of sale systems, and then left Toast to do something else, and then found my way back in the restaurant space again. So it's been fun, exciting, and love to share insights with the group. So.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly from Vestigo Ventures. Thank you so much for being here. By way of background, similar to Yi, actually, I got my start in their corporate finance program. Ended up kind of winding my way through M&A to finding venture capital and was an investor at Synchrony Ventures, their corporate VC arm, before going to business school, which is also how I came to Boston. I co-founded a fintech startup called Alma Pact, that's actually now called Stride Funding, focused on alternative student financing. It's how I met the Vestigo team. I decided investing was a lot more fun. No offense to any of the founders, but I've been doing this ever since, and I absolutely love it.
Hey, thanks everyone. Good evening. Appreciate you guys supporting the rain. My name is Vipul. I'm at SaaSWorks. We're a financial data management platform for recurring revenue businesses. Pretty much everybody in here is going to be a customer someday. So as a way of background on me, I started my entrepreneurial journey right out of high school. So I've lived 3 lives. I'll go through life 1.0 was, today it would be called a FinTech. It would have some cool name. Back then it was financial services data, but we brought the first 401k online. And our slogan was, if you're not Fidelity, call us. And by the time we sold the business, we had 50% of the market share, and we brought the first 401k online. So Fidelity helped us in many, many ways. So I love telling that story. So that business we sold in 2005, that was Life 1.0. Life 2.0, I switched to the dark side. No offense to Kelly, being a founder is better. And I invested for 12 years and started at Goldman Sachs doing private equity, growth equity, buyouts, roll-ups, and then did a variety of investing over the next 12 years. At SaaSWorks, I feel fortunate at Life 3.0. I'm bringing both those disciplines together. We cover finance, we cover data, and we typically sell to businesses that are growth equity or private equity backed. So it should be a fun conversation.
Side note, I feel like there's a future event where we have like debate club of like which is better, investor or founder. I would love to see that that debate take place. So looking around the room, I mean, it's really cool and fun for me to see so many familiar faces, especially founders who are growing companies. And just based on what I know of each of you, you are at different phases of your journey. And so often during those early phases, there's a lot of pivoting, there's a lot of experimentation, there's a lot of experimentation around ICP and willingness to pay. And it can be hard to know when you've hit on the right idea. And so let's start there. How do you know when you've hit on the idea that is the best possible idea? And I guess most importantly, like how do you test? How do you get the validation from the market, from your target customer, that you are onto something? Yi, do you want to start?
Sure. So when we first started Toast, it was a consumer play, and we wanted to do payments and split checks and all that. And it was kind of way ahead of its time. iPhone just came out, Wi-Fi, LTE wasn't quite there. And ultimately, it's about listening to customers, because the restaurant industry is tough, right? We all know it's low margins, high turnover, labor is really challenging, and everybody wants to sell to restaurants. Everybody walks in to sell food or marketing services or credit card, credit card machines or POS. So these get bombarded with products. So one of the reasons why we had trouble with investors was they're like, we're not investing in this company that's selling to restaurants. That's insane, right? And I think you're gonna sell Amazon cloud services and Android tablets and FinTech. That sounds insane, right? But I think one of the things that happened was, what we realized is that restaurants didn't want to talk about consumer experiences or payments or all of that. All ever they want to do is talk about how crappy their POS was, which was also piece of, as you guys know, also know that. So that's when the company realized, like, well, maybe to build a great experience consumer restaurants, we had to own the entire stack. We can't just plug into the infrastructure that's there today. So that was a huge pivot for the company to go build a full-blown point-of-sale enterprise system, right? Not only did we say we're going to do that, we also were like, we're too good for Stripe. We're just going to build our own Stripe and do our own fintech platform. We don't want to use Stripe. We want to make the money, the margins there, right? Ignorance is a little bit of bliss, but I think the insights of how do we just make everything easy for this restaurant owner that's being a CEO, a CFO, a CTO, and a CMO, and they're not really good at any of those, right? And how do we take that pain away, and how to have that big vision of what we could do, and just go after it, right? And I think thinking bigger, pivoting, listening to the customer, being bold in terms of what the future should look like, right? And then taking that step forward. Even when everybody is telling you that you're crazy, right? And maybe you are a little bit crazy, right? And that's what it takes to be founders. So I think those are the lessons learned that I take from Toast in terms of jumping into really hard problems, because they're hard problems, and that's why they're great opportunities. That's why people don't want to go do that, right? Why did Stripe become where it is today? Because it was really hard to work with banks in Europe, in America, in Latin America, right? And do all the integrations and all the nitty-gritty stuff that takes time to learn, right? And now it's, one of the most valuable companies, right, in the space. So that's how I think about it.
I can maybe start on the earliest side. So we took solving in a hard space. We looked at what was a huge problem in the United States. And as students, one that was a $1.4 trillion problem at the time was student loans. And my college roommate had graduated so in debt that she couldn't afford the interest payments off of her first job. So right when you're entering the real world, trying to understand how you figure out life in a new city, start your first job, you also had this huge crushing weight on top of you. And seeing her go through that was something that I really just wanted nobody else to go through. And so we ended up thinking through what are different ways that student loans and financing can be structured. And as a part of that, so that was kind of the broad idea. But we actually, being in Boston, leveraged all of the universities around here and showed up on campuses and just talked to any student we could get to talk to us. And there were lots of students who ran away, I think, thinking we were very creepy, trying to probably sell something. But we just wanted to understand how they thought about it. And I think that for us really just brought a few different insights. It helped us, first off, identify target areas. We decided to focus on graduate students. We'd done a market landscape. We'd seen that there was a gap in the opportunity in the space there, and there was also a higher need. For us, we were underwriting students because we were, giving income share agreements. So we had to think, how can we also balance essentially investing in a person, right? And understanding those outcomes and the variances in those outcomes. So, I would say the biggest takeaway when I think about that time was really coming up with hypotheses and theses and then testing that as rigorously as you can. So one that we tested was that computer science was going to be a great program, as well as medical, like nursing, practitioners, physician assistants. We talked to so many computer science students and they were not interested in this. They had so much confidence in what their outcomes would be in their student loans that they were fine with it. Whereas, for instance, medical students were incredibly interested. And by that, I mean non-doctor medical students. So that for me was one of the biggest takeaways. And it was also being as close to the customer as you can and getting as much feedback as you can.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think customer feedback, I would put number one, number two, and number three. Now, part of when getting your customer feedback, so this is my third rodeo, fourth based on how I counted. And one of the things I learned, SaaSWorks, I've had more learnings than in the past. So when we started the business, we're like, okay, we had a thesis. We're going to build this financial data management platform to serve recurring revenue business. And our thesis was that early stage businesses really needed this. And so we interviewed a bunch of them and they said, yes. We failed to ask the question, would you buy it? And the answer to that was no. So what we learned was, yes, we identified an important pain point. Yes, they all got excited about the idea, where thankfully we got lucky as well, where the problem was even bigger once you got to 3, 5, 10, 20, or 100 million plus in revenue. So the market was right. The pain point was real, but the first TAM we thought we were going after, we just could not have been more wrong. So what I learned is try to ask mom-proof questions. An example is, how often do you go to the gym? I tell Fraser's on our board. By the way, we're backed by Vestigo. They're awesome. And so I'll say 3 times a week. And then he'll say, how many times did you go last week? Well, I didn't go last week. But when I do go, I go 3 times a week. So when you're a founder and you're asking the customer the question, ask that mom-proof question. Like, would they actually buy? What would they pay for it? How imminent, urgent is the pain that this would solve? That's what I've learned. And I wish we would have done even more of that with SaaSWorks. We did quite a bit of it, just not enough of asking that question of like, okay, would you buy it tomorrow? That's my learning on SaaSWorks.
You can hold on to the mic because I'm going to kick the question to you in a sec.
Cool.
I love the commonality here. I mean, I think the theme here that I hear is like obsession with your customer. And I don't even say like curiosity or like I think the best founders display a near obsession with their customers. Like, you need to live and breathe their problems, their opportunities. You want to get as close as possible. And oftentimes it's through conversation. Oftentimes it's through research and data. Like, it could come in so many different formats. But I think obsession is the level of emotion that you need to have about your customer. And I talk with so many investors every single week. And this is one of the things that I hear like really makes people's ears perk up in the wrong way. If it's a domain that you don't know, but you're like, I think this is an interesting question to solve, like that's pretty scary. If you don't know the problem like the back of your hand, you don't know your ICP like the back of your hand, that's a huge risk for somebody to take on if they're going to write you a check. So I think the more that you lean in on the incredible best practices that we heard from the panel, like that is what will put you on the strongest footing when it comes to your own ability to pivot and make smart decisions, when it comes to your ability to fundraise, and ultimately when it comes to your ability to grow a great company. So great segue, Vipul. I love your mom-proof question stance. So building on that, we talked in preparation for this about like your first customer. So often, like the hardest thing is going from 0 to 1, and then it gets easier going to 2, and then easier. But very first customer. I remember you had a strong stance on this when we were talking in advance of this panel. Like, how do you get there? What do you think are best practices people should know?
Yeah, I think, Kristen, you're spot on. Always solve for the customer and really understand what they're looking for. That is the lifeblood of a business. Our first business, I still remember my first customer. They were with us till the day we sold the business 12 and a half years later. Bank of Oklahoma in Tulsa, Oklahoma. named Lee and Body. I'll probably never forget her because she bet on us when nobody should have. And they were a customer till the end. When you're spotting that customer, what you're looking for is somebody that really buys into your vision, because like Yi said, it might be a little bit crazy. It's likely if you're doing something really interesting, it's going to be early or different. So you need to understand why that customer is buying in and make sure that they have their own competitive reason, commercial reason for wanting to be excited about your capabilities. So that was like our first business. For SaaSWorks, our first customer, which we signed up in 2019, 2-3 months after we started, is still with us. It was the same thing. That's a hilarious story. That was, what it takes to close your first customer. That was my co-founder, Jim, had gone to San Francisco to meet this person. So we flew out all the way. We didn't know if there was any revenue. All the wildfires were going on. So they bought a sandwich, sat at a park bench and talked about saying, hey, do you want to be on this journey with us? We'll do our best to make it a joyous journey. And that's how we got our first customer. And what's important is making sure that they're really going to use the product, because some people will support you and say, okay, I'm in, might even pay you some revenue. But if they don't use it and they're not giving you product feedback, you need to think of that first customer as a design partner. That customer is a company called Perkville. For us, they're permanently tattooed in my heart, because that's somebody that gave us all their data, didn't need to believe in us, but did, and has informed quite a bit of the product over the years. I don't know if I'm answering the right
Yes,
question.
absolutely. That is super helpful. And I love how the fact that you will remember this woman forever, because I think like what incredible obsession with the customer, and how that says volumes about how important that very first sale was to you. Yeah, I recall you had a great perspective on this as well. Do you mind sharing?
Yeah, definitely. So we have the opposite problem, is that when we deliver our product, they use it 24/7, like constantly banging on this thing, right? So we didn't have to worry about using that too much. What we had to worry about was that they were going to throw us out after 6 hours of using it, right? So for us, it was about how do we get a first customer that was going to give us a shot and not throw us out after a day, right? Because we knew that it was a complex system. There was so many workflows. It was high pressure, lunch rush hour, dinner rush hour. They're pounding on the system. There's internet, there's payments. We're integrating some old banking system for payments. So a lot of stuff could go wrong. For your first customer, you beg, you borrow, you ask your friends, whatever it takes to do that. And our first customer at Toast was a coffee shop in Cambridge, not too far here. It used to call Dwell Time, but now it's called Barismo. So they're a coffee roastery. Customer number one, patient number one. And turns out my cousin was a part owner of it. So that was a big plus for us. And I think the other piece is like having customers that were much larger, that full service restaurants, big operation, good brand. But, we pivoted because we wanted a smaller cafe that could go back to a square system if something went wrong, right? So those are some of the choices we made. And I think even the first 10 customers, like I remember all of them, hugely impactful. They would call the support number, and you would go to one of the founders, and including myself as a second employee, and whoever picked up would answer support call. And 2 of the founding team members had babies at the time, so they call at 9 o'clock at night. The babies would be crying. They would call back. It was somebody else, and then another baby was crying. So they call me the next day, and they're like, "What the heck's going on? What kind of company is this? Why is every time I call a support number, there's a baby?" Right? So the other thing I would say is just like, sometimes you just be honest with your customers and what's happening, right? And I told them, there's 5 people at this company. We're trying to build a company. We're trying to change the space. And we're all taking turns answering support calls in the middle of the night. And 2 of the founding team members have newborns, and we're working our asses off. And he was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. I was expecting him to be like, okay, here's your system back. I want my money back, and everything. But he was like, I'm crazy, but I'm going to stick out and see what happens. Like, this is kind of crazy, but you guys are trying to do something, build something here. And he was with us for, he's still with us, 12 years later, right? So I think, pick your customers, really think about partnership, and if you're in an environment where mistakes are going to be made because you're a startup, pick someone that's going to be forgiving, right? Don't try to go after a big, one right away. And then just be honest with who you are, what you're trying to build, and what you're trying to do. So.
I love it. I'm such a big fan of the idea of like do the unscalable things, especially in the early days. And as a former founder myself, and then a long time startup operator, like I love the unscalable things. Like I always want to get in there and answer support tickets. Like one of my most formative experiences with a startup here in Cambridge, Wistia, like all of us did support. Like you had your assigned day and you had to answer support tickets, no matter what your role was. And I learned so much about the product, about our support documentation. I mean, everything from that experience. And that's not scalable forever. I get that. But I think those kinds, like hang on to those unscalable things as long as you can, especially when you're nurturing your first customer or your early customers, let's say, because it will teach you so much and it will influence the kind of experience they have with you and the sort of word of mouth that you end up generating in your sphere of influence. All right. So, we've talked about, yes, Kelly, I don't want to skip you. Do you have, do you want to share first?
I would say, I guess, both from a founder investor perspective, on my side, because we are more B2C focused, when you are offering money, everybody wants to be your friend. So our problem at Alma Pact was making sure, to the point on unscalable things, but making sure that the first few people that we gave money to were actually going to pay us back, because our early defaults were going to make or break the company. And so we actually did like interviews. We looked through like psychological tests. Like we wanted to make sure that we didn't want to make it as difficult as possible, of course, but we really wanted to make sure we did the work and we understood that these people were dedicated to their program, they were high caliber, et cetera. And to your point on getting your first customer, like our first student for the financing was a nursing student, and you'll never forget that first person. And then on the investing side, I think what everybody spoke about is being as close to the customer, thinking through your ICP, because there's a lot of push, both if you already have investors and also amongst yourselves, to get first revenue. But it's the quality of revenue that matters. And it's that design partner that you're going to learn from. It's the person that's representative of your ICP. That to me is the most important.
Awesome. So we've talked about sort of pivoting, finding the right product market fit. We've talked about closing your first customer. Let's change gears a little bit and talk about fundraising. So, Kelly, let's stick with you. Like how should a founder gauge whether it's the right moment in time? I mean, I think like there are pros and cons of like waiting as long as you can and then or doing it really early. How do you think about that?
Sure. So at least in my experience, we had the luxury of being students. And I know there's some student founders here. The first thing I would say to student founders is you are incredibly lucky, particularly, being in this Boston ecosystem. Leverage the alumni from your schools, leverage the VCs that are here in Boston, like Vestigo, and ask for advice, right? We reached out to so many different VCs. We did the game of saying we weren't raising, even though we, of course, would take money. And we just talked to so many VCs. And when you're asking for advice and you're not pitching, you're going to hear what concerns they have. You're going to get that direct feedback that they might not want to give when you're just directly pitching them. And so we had, I don't remember how many calls. We were actually planning, we were kind of between first and second year of our MBAs. We were planning on raising in our second year. We ended up raising over the summer from great VCs because we people liked what we were doing. I think if we had thought about when we were raising and the timing, we would have felt it was too early. But we had a mentor at HBS who really pushed us to say, you're ready. And we also, of course, got that market validation by getting the term sheets. So that would be that side. I think on the VC side, it's, hey, do I have the early indications that I can go and actually, one, build something that people are telling me that they want, and two, of course, get that initial sales. How am I going to spend that money? Can I hit the milestones I'm going to need for the next rounds at this point, or do I need to spend a little bit more time on my idea? Would be my short answer.
Awesome.
In this market, how many are starting something right now? Okay. So first, congrats. Market's tough right now. So what I would say is you're going to go through even a stronger founder fitness test. And it's already hard always to build a startup. The one thing I learned is even the fourth time around, apparently it doesn't get any easier. Tech did not make starting a business any easier. All that is just a fallacy. It's still just as much fun. So one, right now, if you can, before you go raise, I think, like Kelly said, talk to people, get as many proof points in on your own as you can. Because right now, if anybody tells you the market's not tough, they're lying. The market's tougher than it's ever been. So differentiate yourself a little bit by having more proof points in place, have those conversations, get the team right. How many are single co-founders? Okay. So if you can find a co-founder, because that does help, because it's pretty lonely at the top. And when the capital raising comes, I do think investors are going to like if I don't think you have to have a second person as a founder. It helps a lot to be able to do that, just because everybody has blind spots. What I found on the capital raising side in the current market is, an angel is an angel. You can't be any earlier than that. But when we raised our seed round, which was through Vestigo, we were ahead of where a seed round would normally be. So we purposely waited. We had met Fraser and heard about Vestigo over 2 years before the investment was made. That mattered to Vestigo, that mattered to us. They wanted to get to know us, we wanted to get to know them. And if you can put up scores that are ahead of what a seed investor is expecting, you're giving them more reasons to say, well, let me hear out the whole story. So what I found is in raising capital with Vestigo is, because we had some of the right stats in place, because we had spent time getting to know them, we did not have a clear, crisp pitch. Like if you've nailed it, your pitch should sound like me, monkey, banana. That is the easiest way to raise capital if your pitch is that tight. Ours was a Shakespearean ballad. Mark might remember that. And I'm sure there were many moments of like, what do they do? But if you've got good customer feedback, you've got a team that's excited about you, some market validation, you're ahead of where a seed round should be. That is going to help in this market. Our hope is to raise our A when we're already at the size of a B. My last piece of advice, maybe should have been number one, is those early investors, you better fall in love with them. They are going to shape your company more than the bigger checks may come later, but the early investors are going to really shape how you build your business. And whether it's your first rodeo or your fourth or fifth, every journey is different. And whether it's a joyous journey or not is going to depend on these early investors. So for us at Vestigo, what really won us over, and my co-founder was the founding CTO at HubSpot. He had built multiple businesses as well. We had this dinner where the whole firm showed up. The only person that couldn't make it is because they had a silly accident. We can rub it in again. But otherwise, Jim and I just asked each other a question. Do we feel lighter leaving the dinner or heavier leaving the dinner? If you feel lighter, you likely have a great fit. And we felt as light as a feather. I think we closed the deal 6 weeks later. So do look for that fit, run towards someone, don't get enamored by valuation or brand. Those early investors, it really matters if the chemistry is there. I can't stress that strongly.
Yeah, I'm currently fundraising, and so I'm experiencing kind of some of those things. And I think fortunately, I think it's easier, I think, second time around. First time around was really hard. Either that, we're really bad at fundraising the first time around. But I think, when we're trying to raise seed with Toast, it was hard. And investors didn't really believe in the vision of restaurants buying, as I mentioned earlier, cloud, Android, tablets, all of that. And I think it ultimately came down to metrics for us. It was when we could prove that every dollar invested could produce $1 of ARR, which was like top-notch SaaS metrics. So really understand kind of like your business model, your metrics, and like maybe it's the East Coast thing, right, versus West Coast offense, which is, understand your business model early. Can you prove that? Can you scale that? And that makes it a lot easier in terms of conversation. So, after, the initial seed and A, everybody wanted to come in at B, right? And it was much easier. And then from there on, it was like everybody wanted to invest, and it was about allocations. So I think that's something to think about, is how do your business work, and not just fall in love with the technology or the space and the mission. You do have to put your commercial hat on and prove, whether it's for enterprise SaaS or it's direct to consumer, what are the top metrics you have to be meeting or have a path of getting there and convincing your investors that you can get there. So that's what I would say. And then, if you're a second-time founder or third-time founder, I think it does get a little bit easier because you have seen the experience, whether it's success or failure. So how do you leverage that? And I think showing humility of what you've learned, whether you've been successful or a failure, is really critical, because I think that's real, right? In terms of, the experience you take from the past and how do you apply it to the future, right? So that's what I would say.
Awesome. I want to underscore, a point, Vipul, I think you made it so well around the fact that your early investors are going to shape your company in really important ways. I know you touched on that as well. I think that cannot be underscored enough. The people that you have in your corner who are advocating for you, who are making introductions on your behalf, really who are helping you see around corners to anticipate risks, to anticipate opportunities and help you act on those. That is paramount. And sadly, I've had a lot of conversations with founders who do take a check and then end up getting pushed around. And in talking to them, they're like, I should have known. This question came up during our conversation, and I could feel in my gut that something was weird, and I didn't listen to my gut. And so I think that listening to your gut and recognizing the influence that early investors have, for better or worse, obviously in this case for better, but is so important in the early days because it will impact you for years, decades to come. So last question, and then we want to leave a little bit of time for folks to comment and ask questions. We will all stick around and would love to hear other questions you might have. But last question, you've now gotten to the point, you've raised some capital. How do you think about deploying that capital for growth versus maintaining and extending where possible cash runway, and especially at a moment in time like this?
From a VC side, so we kind of see a whole gamut. I have a company in our portfolio that spends very little, has almost 3 years of runway and is growing nicely, but they've started to see signs, they've started to see repeatability and scalability. And that's where, it's kind of our job talking about, investor in your corner to push them. Hey, you've come across a motion that you feel works. You're starting to see signs of PMF. You need to start deploying more to grow that company, and you need to think through that balance. The point Vipul made, I think, can't be underscored enough. If you want to have an easy time fundraising, it means having the metrics. And so I think being smart about every dollar that's being spent, to what Yi said as well, and saying, if I'm spending this dollar, what am I getting out of it? And I think not enough founders do that, because it's hey, I raised this money and now I just got to hit X amount of money and I'm going to go raise some more. And markets shift on you. 3 years ago, it was $1 million ARR to raise a Series A. Now it might be 2 to 3 million. And so it's that focus, I think, on building that sustainable business that's the most important from my perspective.
Yeah, spend wisely. But you can hold your baseball bat too tight. So one of the things I promised Kristen is I would just share some of the mistakes we've made as well. So we got to product market promise, product market fit. I can sit here telling you today, we just hired our first couple of salespeople in January. We should have done that a year ago. And pretty much every investor, including Vestigo, was pushing us to do that. But there were a couple of things that had us nervous. And I think there's never a right time for certain things. So once my lesson learned is bring on salespeople. It's okay if you bring them on a little sooner than you wanted. I encourage you to not do what we did, which is bring them on a little later than we needed. It worked to our favor in some ways, but I think we left some growth on the table along the way. But I do think investors are now looking for. So I just probably met a half dozen investors. Just we stay in touch. That's our business. We meet new customers through investors. So we ask them, hey, what are the KPIs that matter the most right now? And the one thing that's happened is growth and burn multiple now almost come up together. And so what folks are looking for is grow your business. You have to, but keep your burn multiple in mind. And now the reason that's coming to bear is folks want to know, are you spending with high ROI, to Kelly's point? So we are starting to see that. So when you balance that balancing act is really hard. Engineering is going to tell you we're underinvested in engineering. Sales is going to tell you we don't have enough salespeople. Marketing going to tell you we don't even market. And so everybody's going to be, as a founder, that's one of the hardest things you got to do and say, okay, well, all 5 are probably right. How do you force rank that capital accordingly? And in the early stages, you won't have a CFO there. Bring on a finance person as soon as you can, but you won't do that until you've done your A. Most people don't bring on a CFO until they've raised a Series A. So until then, you're the CFO. I don't know, read a couple of books. I have one, Never Split the Difference. But because don't make marginal decisions and say, I'm going to make 5 people sort of happy. Force rank. Pick a first among equals and say, you know what, right now, that was my first comment when I walked in the door. Right now at SaaSWorks, all the investment is in go-to-market because we waited 6-9 months longer than we should have. So right now there's no second, there's a third and a fourth, but it's very clear. And be decisive. And if you're a founder, it's not going to make you popular when you're decisive that way, but you're going to have to be.
All right. Well, we will all stick around. We would love to continue the conversation more informally. So please come chat. We'd love to keep talking about this. We will probably refrain from doing organized Q&A just so people can have more one-off conversations. But please come and talk with us. And a huge round of applause for our amazing panel.